Thank you, Ken.
Excellent. Thanks, Derek. Hello there, Dave. How are you? So, to be very blunt, how do we measure? So I'll change the heading around. How do you measure your psychophysiology? What's the best indicator of your psychophysiology? Your trading account balance. That's the best measure of your psychophysiology. To what degree are you achieving states? Again, your trading account balance tells you everything. So that's the reality. That's the effect. So everything is pretty much cause and effect. So that's the effect. Trading account balance is the effect. But we want to look into what is the cause. How do we measure the cause of peak performance in terms of your psychophysiology? So your psychology is your mental states, your cognitive and your subconscious processing of data. So as I've said before, what many people don't know is that you actually, so I will actually go back and just go through a couple of these things. The way that you make decisions, there's two systems that actually enable you to make decisions: your subconscious response and your conscious or your cognitive processing. So your psychophysiology, for measuring psychophysiology, we want to measure how we're responding to the markets. And the first way that we want to see is instinctively, as a matter of your nervous system, how are you responding? That's a peak performance measure. So one peak performance measure is reaction time. And you measure reaction time in terms of giving a signal on the screen and seeing how quickly or how long it takes you to actually click a mouse button back. That's a reaction time. And that's an indicator of peak performance. If you're very, very tense, you're actually going to be very, very slow in recognizing that, you know, for instance, a green light was shone on the screen and it was time to press the mouse button. So that's one of the indicators of your ability to, or where on that band of peak performance your psychophysiology is. So where is your psychology in terms of being able to register something and be able to take the appropriate action? Then we have, instead of just looking at psychology as a measure of performance in terms of how are you processing data in terms of emotional data and also your environment around you, we want to look at the physiology as well. This is why yesterday when we were talking about, and Lev brought up Dr. Van Tharp, he's, again, because he's, you know, a 70, 80-year-old man now, and very much a pioneer of the psychology of trading, there is a step beyond psychology, and that is the psychophysiology of things. And so in addition to just thinking about how are we associating certain events in terms of trading, subconsciously and consciously, we're also taking it to another level and saying, well, how is that actually causing a response in our physiology? And that's the way that we start to connect our thoughts with our actions. It's not enough just to say, psychologically, how are you responding or processing events and data, because you can also be very, very passive in terms of your responsiveness. But we want to actually measure physiologically how are we responding to stimuli in order to create an effect in terms of trading success. So these are the two aspects which go hand in hand. So what we can actually do is we can measure physiology and go backwards and start to address what your psychology is like. So in classic psychology, the only way that you can get into any form of understanding with the other person is actually just through a dialogue. But with including physiology, we can actually get into your psychology by understanding what your body is telling us as a response to your thoughts. So this is this webinar today is about reaffirming everything that we've spoken about these last 10 or 12 weeks, however long it's been now. But it's definitely, how many webinars have we done so far, Derek?
It's been quite a few. I think we're probably up to 15, 16, yeah, maybe one or two more.
So this entire webinar is really about today's topic is really about just reaffirming everything that we've spoken about on an individual basis, and I think even yesterday was a good precursor by bringing up Dr. Van Tharp. So a little bit about Dr. Van Tharp. Dr. Van Tharp, being a doctor of psychology, he's actually very much his main focus is NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. So his mantra, his entire professional career is that he's into finding out successful behavior, working out the pattern in that behavior, and then teaching people to replicate that by through repetition. And repetition allows for the autonomic nervous system to remember things, and therefore you start to duplicate the behavior. So it's a very, psychology is very effective, and it can very easily lead to a very, very long period of time before you start getting to some really deep results. Simply the nature of most good psychologists will tell you that their job is for you not to come there anymore, and yet seldom do people not go back to their psychologist anymore once they start up with one. There are certain techniques in psychology, one that's based on rapid eye movement, which decreases the amount of time that one needs to spend in some form of therapeutic model, but biofeedback, so using physiology, allows us to decrease the amount of time it takes to learn any one given task by getting the body to respond to cues, in addition to the psychological conscious that's being done. So measuring the peak performance allows us, this methodology allows us to have a very effective means of measuring, because we can perfectly correlate your responses to the markets, as I've demonstrated a couple of times. When you have a look at some trades and the biodata that accompanies some of these trades, it becomes very, very obvious what a peak performing state ends up being. And I think one of the most dramatic examples of measuring peak performance is peripheral temperature. Peripheral temperature really has to be, for me personally, one of the most profoundly obvious indicators, biological indicators of whether or not you're in a peak state. And I'm just going to show you a winning trade and a losing trade in terms of the physiology. And you see the red line, the temperature line, how straight it is. So this is this is more than 30 minutes worth of recording during a trade. And you can see the temperature line is just constantly increasing towards 35 degrees Celsius. And when you see, if I find a losing trade, and then if you see, no, that's not it. It should be this. And then if you see a losing trade, you can see what temperature does. It's profound. Every single time, every losing trade, temperature, you're unable to maintain a smooth temperature. It's just physically absolutely impossible to do. And just going back to see, this is another winning trade. You can just see the temperature line is just absolutely perfect. And if I see, yeah, so this is just another one again. You can see the temperature. And what's interesting about this is that even though I've been able to maintain a temperature of 35 degrees, which is just an ability to stay relatively calm and relaxed, even in a losing trade, you can't get rid of the volatility. No, you could be a Buddhist monk and you wouldn't be able to this. You just can't. Body is responding to the environment. That's just reality. And this again comes down to why it's so important, and going on from what we said yesterday about quantifying things. It's so important to quantify things, in addition to what we spoke about yesterday in terms of your routine, your system, and really facing reality in terms of its performance. It's the same thing with our biology. It's easy to turn around and say, no, I was pretty relaxed, no, I think my biology was fine. But when you actually do quantify the way your body responded to the markets at that point in time, your biology, by quantifying it, you can't lie. It's just simply there in background. And so regardless of the fact that I was super calm, we know that I was having a difficult time. Biologically, I was having a very difficult time during the market. Why? Because I was on the wrong side of the market. And every single winning trade, and I really mean this, every single winning trade, that's another losing trade, every single winning trade has that sort of a temperature. It's just so profoundly obvious a winning and a losing trade. And so measuring peak performance, biology, now, like just by looking at this data and the previous screen, you know what my mental state was. You don't need to know specifically, well, Ken, what were you thinking about? I mean, like what was the issue today? It doesn't even matter what the issue today was, or what it was yesterday. We know that in these other trades, we know that I was struggling to maintain a clear and calm disposition. That's all that as traders. It's a successful trade. It's a losing trade. That's a snapshot. Yeah. So it doesn't matter. See, this is the thing as well in terms of psychology. sometimes we can get caught up into analyzing. So in a losing trade, so if we connect psychology and trading, right? So you want to go to a psychologist because of your trading performance. I've done this too, so talk from experience. You can get into getting into detail in terms of what it was that you were thinking about today, or what issue was giving you problems whilst you were trading today, which didn't allow you into a peak state, for instance. So I'll just make something up. Say, for instance, you say, what could you say? I'll just make some. I had an argument with my wife, right? And then, next week you could have a losing trade again, and you see him and you come up with something else. The point of all that is that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the wrapping paper, the context of what the problem is doesn't matter. If you get too caught up into analyzing what it was, there's 1,000,001, if not an infinite amount of different types of contexts that you can actually turn around and say, well, this issue, when I was, 5.5 years old, my, budgerigar was let out of the cage, and that caused, you can go into so many different things that caused you some form of distress, that it ends up being a self-defeating process of trying to analyze why you couldn't get into a peak performance state. And so the only way of being able to do it is to simply classify things as being in state and being not in state, and letting the context go. And then you start to free yourself up from being, I'll use this again loosely, superstitious. So when you start getting into too detailed a context, as you start to fall into, well, I have to do this exactly the same, and then, oh wow, this type of music makes me feel good, so I'm going to listen to this music before I trade. But what you'll find is, again, if you quantify things, you'll find that the music does not help you get into a peak state. Like you see a lot of professional athletes before a game or something, they're wearing their headphones and they're listening to specific types of music to get into a peak state. They've actually done research. It doesn't help at all. It's actually counterproductive to actually do that. So this feel-good state, that there is a way of getting into a feel-good state. These other methods that you might think they work, is again same as yesterday's works, but until you quantify it, you don't know, and you could be misleading yourself. There's only one way of getting into a peak state, and that is literally through your biology and by calming down your mind. And the easiest way to calm down your mind is by calming down your biology. It's because it's a physical, our body is a physical tool, so it's quite easy for us to, by monitoring it, by measuring it, you can turn around and say, oh, hang on a second, my breathing is out of sync now, therefore my thoracic nerve has been activated, therefore my pelvic splanchnic nerve has not been activated, therefore I cannot get into a peak state now. It's impossible. It physically is impossible to get into a peak state. On the other side of the coin is, okay, I'm relaxed, my breathing is this, my abdominal to thoracic breathing ratio is X, therefore I now know that I do have the muscle relaxation, that I am breathing abdominally enough to be able to activate my pelvic splanchnic nerve, therefore I can get into a peak state. I am getting there to being on the boundary of where I actually might quite well get into a peak state. But what you'll find is that whilst you're moving towards that zone, your mind is going to get calmer. And all of a sudden, we don't need to know whether your mind is calm or not, simply because we're going to look at your breathing and turn around and say, well, 5 minutes, he's been breathing between 5.5 and 6.5 breaths per minute. This guy is definitely, either he's hitting into it or he's very much on the boundary of being into a peak state. And that allows you to have a greater sense of certainty that your decisions will be better than what they would be if you are not in that physiological state. So decision making is really on a spectrum in terms of your biological regulation. If you are totally, take an extreme, you're drunk and high, right? Biologically, so that's your biological state, your blood alcohol content. And so we know that your ability to make a decision with that sort of biology is what it is. It's hopeless. And as your blood alcohol level starts to decrease, your decision-making ability increases proportionately to the amount of alcohol that's decreasing in your blood system. When you start moving towards the other end of the spectrum, the amount of muscle tension, or the type of muscle tension that you have, or relaxation, the amount of blood oxygen supply that's actually in your brain, the amount of contraction and expansion of your heart, these are all things that now start to dictate how good your decision making is. Just the way on the other side, your decision-making ability is correlated to the movement increasing in blood alcohol or decreasing in blood alcohol, the same way, proportionately, your decision-making ability increases with certain biological improvements in terms of their performance as well. So quantifying all this gives us psychologically, right? So psychologically, it gives us a sense of certainty. You have greater certainty and greater confidence because there's not much left that's just fuzzy logic. There's not much left in the whole trading process anymore, which is up to second guessing. Me personally, I can't second guess certain things when I trade because everything is pretty much quantified now. I know what's happening to me biologically. I know what's happening to me in terms of the trading process, if I've done it correctly or if I haven't done it correctly, and therefore there's nothing much to think about anymore. If my temperature is starting to get very, very volatile and I'm struggling, so because what happens is you can start to lie to yourself, right? And this is what happens when we trade most of the time. You get into a trade, and let's say, for instance, we'll take an example of a losing trade. You get into a losing trade and you just say to yourself, no, I think it's going to get better, right? That's one of the first things that you say. No, I think it's going to be okay. I'll just wait the next 5-minute bar. And you actually start to lie to yourself, because the reality is that your biology has gone into a fight-flight response. But you're trying to override your biology, say, no, Ken, this is not a scary position. It's going to be okay. But the body's saying, man, this is awful. I hate this. No, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Where as soon as we feel that the reality is something that we don't want, that we've moved into a threatening environment, we actually should stop it straight away. So, and by measuring it, we can tell. So all of a sudden, it's like, Ken, you're lying to yourself. Look what your biology is telling you, and you can't deceive yourself. Much the same way when you go into a profitable trade, and it's like, I should just take my profits now, because the market might turn, and it's like, why would you take money out of the market now when when your biology is like this. When your biology is like this. And so you turn around and say, hang on, Ken, your mind's freaking out now, but your biology is as calm as it can get. So why not just listen to your biology and stay in the trade for a little bit longer? So because your biology will not lie, it can't lie. It's binary. Our biology is binary. The only second guessing that comes is through our mind. Our mind can turn around and say, no, it's okay. It's not that cold today, but your body's shaking. Your body's shivering. No, it'll be fine. But your biology responds, and that's where the power of psychophysiology is, and measuring things. All of a sudden, our inclination to lie to ourselves, to deceive and delude ourselves is taken away, and we're always presented with the truth of the matter. And so that's a little bit about a sort of wrap-up webinar in terms of the importance of measuring our psychophysiology. And it was nice how Irving brought up yesterday the two systems, the need for quantification, which has moved into today's discussion about the importance of really quantifying things so that we're exposed to misrepresentation and misperception. So if you're going to, so this again is important to recognize. If we by behavior misrepresent things, right? So let's say, for instance, this trading system whole thing, right, that we're talking about yesterday, just to keep the same track of thought. And you say, no, it's okay. My system is good. My system is good. You know, it's just the markets or whatever, right? If you are inclined to have that form of behavior, cognitive behavior, that way of thinking, that same way of thinking is going to be applied when you look at the markets. So when you look at a price chart, you're going to employ the same strategy of thinking. It's a methodology of thinking, right? This is very important to understand. We have patterns of thinking. If you delude yourself, if you entertain illusion in anything, which is to stay away from reality, where reality is a quantified truth, right? If you entertain this stuff and hide away from reality, you will do that when you look at the price charts. If you are open and honest with yourself, and you do check things, and you do write things down, and you do refer back to them, so that you don't misperceive things later on, you're going to have that clear perception when it comes to the markets. You're going to speak very honestly to yourself and say this and this and this, and this is the case. So this sort of the stuff that we're talking about these weeks and instilling in terms of the spreadsheet on Google Drive is about starting to quantify things which up until recently are qualitative in nature, but we want to put a number between 1 and 5 on them in order to start getting a feel for quantifying our thoughts and our physiological responses to the markets and to our own decisions. So you make a decision to go long, the market goes short, but you've quantified it. And now all of a sudden we're starting to create different behaviors and patterns of behavior in terms of our thinking. So patterns of behavior can be physical, but we want to go further back and say, what is the pattern of behavior of our thinking? And how should we be thinking? We should be, and so by quantifying our thought processes and seeing the response So, you know, I was a 2 for this and a 4 for that, and now it was a losing trade. Next week you do it again. Well, I was a 3 for that, I was a 5 for that. Wow, I was a winning trade. And all of a sudden we start to quantify behavior, and we start to teach ourselves that there is a right way of behaving which gives us a positive trade, and there are other ways of behavior which will always give us a negative, a losing trade. We're going to, once we get a good grasp of the Google Drive sheets and we start to employ them consistently, then we're going to get into further quantification by quantifying our biology and turning around and say, well, during that trade, and you're going to be able to look at your own data, and you're going to be able to say, well, during that trade, it was a successful trade. My temperature was nice and even throughout the whole thing. And that allows you then to attach your internal association. So, for instance, if we were trading now, and this was our chart of our biology, you could look at this and you could turn around and say, wow, this is what it feels like to be in a winning trade in terms of my biology. Okay, my temperature is stable. Okay, so this is what this feels like. And you start creating an association. And that means that if you don't have your biology present, you're still going to be able to say to yourself, I know this feeling. This feeling is the one that I have when my temperature is very, very calm and it's very, very high. I feel like I'm in a state of vasodilation. So we're starting to give our mind direction and focus so that it starts looking at other things which are more important than things that we may have been looking at previously. So just as for me, my personal opinion, it's a waste of time to be looking at too many markets and too many technical indicators. I would rather use my limited attention span and cognitive focus to be focused on my own biology. I think that for me personally, my own biology is a better indicator of whether or not I'm going to be successful today than what a correlated or non-correlated market could be, or what a news feed item is going to come out is, or what some other trader is going to write about some trade that he's going to make now. So we want to start to train our own focus to be internally generated on ourselves. So we're trading for ourselves, for our own account. Therefore, we should be focused on ourselves, because that's for whom and by whom we're actually making these decisions. So just because Peter in somewhere in the world has gone long the euro does not mean, and it's going to be, and he's usually right when he goes long the euro, doesn't mean that his decision is correct for me. Time frames could be different, just as one. If he's going to go long and he's going to stay in the market for the next 4 hours, it could be a losing trade for me if I'm going to be in the markets for the next 15 minutes. So I can go short in the exact moment that he goes long, and I can be right and he can be right. So all of these external factors, which we can't measure, we want to throw away, and we want to start to train our mind to focus on that which we do have control over and that which we can measure. So it goes down to that principle of locus of control. You don't want to waste your time focusing on something that you can't control, because that just leads to frustration, anger, resentment, depression, sadness, and all the crap that we don't need. But if you focus your attention on the things that you can control, all of a sudden you can start to gain mastery. Now, you can control your breathing there, and by default or by association, you can control your heart rate. By doing that, you can actually control your temperature. And so this now, all of a sudden, you can have confidence that in time, you're going to have greater control of your body, greater awareness of your body. Therefore, you're going to have a greater acuity as to whether or not you've moved into a threatening situation or whether you've moved into an opportunity. Now, this gives you discernment and clarity. Therefore, you can now start to pick trades better than before. And this 60% success rate is very achievable for everyone using this methodology. For everyone. If you only go by biology, 60% success rates in your trade is a definite. So what we're doing now is, and what we've done, and actually yesterday, this morning, but I didn't have time because of this China trip. But now we've implemented 6 algorithms, and I think by the end of the week, all 16 algorithms are going to be in the software, which means that you're not going to have to press the mouse button. It's going to simply do the execution for you, and it's going to run the execution through 16 different types of trading / behavioral models, and effectively going to take 16 trades with one trade. But again, that's the point, is that it's totally quantified now. There's even less stuff to think about. You need to get yourself into a state, and everything is being measured for you in order to be able to have increases in performance at a consistent rate at that 60/40 rate. So that's a bit of a wrap up on the quantification of things and how important it is, and why this methodology really is going to pay well for all the guys that continue to utilize it and learn about it and employ it as much as they can in their own trading.